Today we're just going to fly out over South Devon from the former RAF Bolthead, and we're having a look at a shipwreck, the Herzogin Cecilie, that went aground on the Hamstone in 1936. My name's Chris, and firstly I'd like to apologise for being off air for a few months. Very unfortunately, YouTube, in their infinite wisdom, suspended my channel from what they call the partner program. Well, this effectively means I earn nothing from all the films I put up, and all the films that I've had up on my channel, any of the earnings and income goes to YouTube. So that really sort of knocked me back a bit. And after 3 months, I was able to appeal, and thankfully I've been successful, and I'm now able to be back in the partner program and earning from my films. I hope you'll forgive me, and sincerely, please have a subscribe. Do check out the rest of my films on my channel, and I think you'll find them very interesting. There's certainly lots there about local history around South Devon. Now, in the film today, we're taking a look at a very, very lovely ship. She was called the Herzogin Cecilie, and she was more affectionately known as the Duchess, because the name Herzogin translates from German to English as Duchess Cecilie, named after the Duchess of Cecilie of Mecklenburg. So, unfortunately, 1936, she was making a journey from, well, first I'll just tell you a little bit about the ship. She was a four-masted steel barque built by Rickmers of Bremerhaven in 1902 as a school ship for the North German Lloyd Line. She was 314 feet long with a gross tonnage of 3,242. And when the Great War started, the Herzogin Cecilie was interned in Chile for the duration, and afterwards she was allocated to France by the War Repatriations Board. The Germans tried to repurchase her but were turned down flat, and eventually she passed into Finnish ownership, being bought and commanded by Captain Gustav Eriksson of Mannheim. Under his ownership, the Herzogin Cecilie carried cargoes all over the world, but it was the Australian grain races that made her famous, winning 8 of them in succession. In 1936, the Duchess started what was to be her last grain race from Port Lincoln to Australia. She arrived in Falmouth in just 86 days, comfortably beating her nearest rival. Her orders at Falmouth were to proceed to Ipswich to discharge her cargo of grain, but 2 days later, early on the morning of the 25th of January, in thick fog and rough seas, the Herzogin Cecilie struck the Hamstone just a few miles from Salcombe, and it was just off the cove at Soar Mill. She was holding the forepeak, and the ship was pounded fiercely and then settled by her head with her well decks awash. When dawn broke, just about everybody and her aunt had turned up to view the wreck, and quite a lot thought that they should also go on board. This considerably hampered the rescue operation, but in the end, the Salcombe lifeboat took off 22 of the crew, leaving just the captain, his wife, and 6 crew members. A breeches buoy was rigged up to take off all the luggage and personal belongings, but most of this, sadly, was quickly stolen when it was landed by various members of the public, who had by now degenerated in something of a mob. For 7 weeks, the Herzogin Cecilie lay stranded on the Hamstone, whilst her 4,500 tons of grain rotted and fermented. The stench was appalling, and fears of it polluting the beaches around Salcombe kept the owner and the local council arguing fit to bust. Every day, huge crowds gathered to view the Duchess, and local farmers made a fortune charging people to cross their land for a better look. Eventually, the grain became so swollen that it started to crack the decks, and this seemed to galvanise the salvage attempt, and by the 7th of June, enough of her rotting cargo had been removed to allow installation of powerful pumps, and on each high tide, tugs repeatedly attempt to pull her off. At first, it looked as if the Duchess was stuck fast, but finally, on the 19th of June, Herzogin Cecilie floated clear of the handstone. The local council still would not let her be towed into Salcombe, which turned out to be a tragic mistake, and they feared all manner of disease. So in the end, sadly, the Duchess was beached in Starehole Bay, just at the entrance to Salcombe Harbour. Unfortunately, what appeared to be a safe sandy bottom concealed rocks, and in the July gales she broke her back and her mast, soon tumbled down into the sea. It was the beginning of the end. Ironically, if the Salcombe Harbour authorities had allowed her into the harbour, she would have been saved, unloaded, and on her way before the gales came. As it was, the thing that the council feared most happened. The grain washed out of the wreck and fetched up on all the local beaches. However, it did not cause any pollution because the seagulls ate most of it and the rest got washed away. So much for the experts, even back in 1936.
An interesting but rather sad sight for visitors to Salcombe is the Herzogin Cecilie. This old sailing ship, one of the world's most famous windjammers, is derelict since going on the rocks at Hope Cove. After winning the grain race from Australia no fewer than 8 times, the old ship is abandoned. Nobody loves her, the worm-eaten, waterlogged old lady. No more will she shiver her timbers. Hello, there are fairies at the bottom of her garden. The last voyage was the honeymoon trip of her owners, Captain and Mrs. Ericsson, who have tried to save their ship but failed. Her winding sheet is rotting sea vegetation, which doesn't smell a bit like lilies, and it's really about time she sank. But it's all very sad-making.
And you can see the Herzogin Cecilie in the Starehole Bay. This is some film footage that was taken by some divers in more recent years, where they dived on the wreck and went through the lower parts of the hull. And it's amazing to see how the sea and the sand and the fish and everything have taken over. It was truly a stunning ship in its time, and it did achieve the fastest record from Australia to the UK of 86 days. But it's sadly here floundering in Starehole Bay. A few images of the ship sailing, which are very majestic. A four-masted barque, which which rated at the time as one of the fastest sailing ships, and I think they could achieve around about 20 knots on a good steady wind. And you can see how much work and how many crew were involved in keeping these ships going. It was a massive job. They were massive ships, and it was a very sad time when they eventually passed away. This is some fairly rare footage, and it's from a film that was taken and titled Around the Horn. And it's really featuring not particularly the Herzogin Cecilie, but a square-rigged four-masted barque of a very similar layout. And it's equally possible to see the amount of work and the amount of crew that was required to rig and keep these ships sailing at their top speed.
On board at the time was Diana Walton, a friend of the captain's wife, Pamela Ericsson. Now in her 80s, she still remembers vividly what happened on that dreadful night.
I was peacefully asleep. I'd been on deck with my friend, Pamela Ericsson, to look, because she said, "You must come up and see a great ship in sail at night. It's such a beautiful sight." And she took me on deck, and it was all quiet, and it was wonderful, with no engine, just the beautiful sails against the sky, dark sky. And then we went down and went to bed, and I was fast asleep. And my friend woke me up and said, "We've hit something, get up quick." So I got up quick, and she said, "Get your clothes on." They weren't my clothes, actually. They were partly hers and partly the captain's, because he would not have any woman on board his ship in a skirt. All women had to wear trousers. He said it was only fair on the Finnish boys.
Captain Sven Eriksson, the master of the Herzogin Cecilie, and his South African wife, formerly Miss Pamela Bourne, they'd just completed their honeymoon trip, and they steadfastly refused to leave the vessel after her collision with the Hamstone, and remained on board for several days, making only occasional trips ashore by means of the breeches buoy. It was not until Monday that Captain Eriksson reluctantly accepted the opinion of the local men, well versed in the perils of the coast, and the ship must be regarded as lost. He and his wife had clung vainly to the hope that their beautiful vessel could be extracted from her difficult position and patched up. They bowed to the inevitable, however, and they entered upon the mournful task of stripping the ship of the lighter gear and salvaging a proportion of the 4,500 tons of wheat on board, for which a contract was arranged. The sad tale of the wreck of the Herzogin Cecilie contains elements of personal tragedy as well as the irreparable loss to the world of ships. It shattered the home of the captain and his bride and sent her doomed to her doom, one of the few remaining four-masters sailing ships of the seas. The ship's owner, Gustav Eriksson, was deeply devastated by the loss of his favourite vessel and never forgave Captain Eriksson for what he viewed as an unnecessary loss. And then, due to the severe damage to his reputation and the loss of the vessel, Sven Eriksson did not receive another command. Sven Eriksson had recently married Pamela Bourne, who was on board for that final trip just prior to the incident. The Herzogin Cecilie was eventually completely lost by 1939, and this, of course, the loss of the Duchess marked the end of Sven Eriksson's time commanding the great grain ships. Captain Sven Eriksson and his wife Pamela eventually returned to Finland, and before not very long they were planning to move to South Africa, to which they did, and became farmers. Sven Eriksson died in South Africa in 1954. On these days in the 2020s, it's hard to believe that this beautiful ship was lost there way back in 1936. Thank you very much for taking the time to watch my film, and I'll look forward to seeing you on the next one. Take the greatest of care. All the very best. Cheers for now.